I'm like spying on your LinkedIn. All right, and we are live. We have 70 plus visitors right now, attendees in the session. So welcome everyone to the second half, let's say, of the day for this performance marketing track. I'm Ines, your host for the day and for the performance marketing track. Happy to have with me Russell McAthy. He is the CEO of Ringside. We're going to talk about the lifetime value and the actual cost of acquiring customers. If you're running campaigns or if you have a new product, one of the main things that you'll be talking about probably with your teams is how we can get new customers. So, and we talk a lot about the cost of acquiring customers, a big topic for us marketeers. So, how we understand that for in our day-to-day marketing. Russell will show examples and explain how to approach the cost to acquire customers, how to then apply this to lifetime value, and how everyone can go apply this to their own organization. Russell, welcome. And yeah, I leave the floor to you to introduce yourself, what do you do, and the session.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ines. I will share the. There we go. Awesome. Hi, everyone. Apologies in advance. I've got COVID and I haven't been able to talk for the last 2 days. So I'm a little bit head coldy, but we'll power through for the next 30 or so minutes. So when we were planning this talk, one of the things I wanted to make sure that we sort of told as a story was how marketing data and how attribution feed into both lifetime value and cost to acquire a customer. And we're going to go through a number of elements that lead into CAC, or cost to acquire a customer, and LTV from a lifetime value perspective. And the lead into that comes into two forms, but a brief introduction. So this is me when I was slightly thinner, pre-COVID. And I've been doing marketing data for over 15 years now. And I'm CEO and co-founder of Ringside Data. I'm a fan of dinosaurs cooking in the NFL, and I don't like cats. So sorry if I've offended anyone there. But you can find more at my personal website or at ringside.ai or at the Rusty Bear on Twitter, which is at the bottom right-hand corner of these slides. If you've got any questions, put them in the chat or come and find me on Twitter or via one of those links. So as we go through the deck today, we're going to cover two major topics. The first one being marketing attribution. It's a topic that's spoken about quite a bit. I think I was one of the first people to talk about this about 9 or 10 years ago. And it's the thing that I've been pushing for as an agenda moving forward, and getting people more knowledgeable about what attribution can do, what it can't do. And it's incredibly important when we start to look at things around lifetime value and how much you're spending to acquire a customer, to understand what data you take into consideration when you're having those conversations internally. So the story today will move through and we'll finish up on the complexities of lifetime value. So in the first section, we'll talk about marketing attribution. So firstly, what is marketing attribution? So the industry as a whole talks about attribution as the art of giving credit to marketing interactions, which is not wrong. However, there are a number of nuances that is really important to understand when you're looking at the performance of marketing. And it's not just about giving credit and moving the value of a conversion through different stages of that buying funnel. What we talk about at Ringside and over the last 10 years is we've changed the terminology here to talk about better understanding the things that influence customer behavior. It's not just about giving credit where credit's due. It's actually about having a better understanding as a marketer or an analyst or an advertiser to say, what are the interactions that are truly influencing customer behavior? Because what the output to this is incredibly actionable. It's not just about moving numbers around in a spreadsheet. Excuse me. It's about understanding why a customer is doing the things that they're doing and what we can take from that to change their customer journey. So attribution in the marketplace, there is one company out there that's spoken about it more than more than any, and that is the Big G. I'm not going to say the name of the brand because I have a bunch of their products in this room, and everything will start going off and asking me questions. But they have spoken about attribution a lot, and you'd assume that they have a pretty specific model that they use and the way they communicate it. Unfortunately for marketers, they have at least 9 different models. And when I say different models, I'm not saying like last click or first click. They actually have 9 different technologies doing attribution. So the model that's in Analytics 360 that will be deprecated in July next year is different from the one in GA4, which is different from the one in search ads, which is different from the one in campaign manager. It's different, and most importantly, it's very different to the one that's in Google Ads. So saying that you're using Google's attribution model, as much as I can go through all the reasons why it's flawed, they actually have a very different model that they take into consideration when they're calculating it. So if you're not using one of those technology vendors in that space, there are 2 other options for you. The first one is self-build. So you base that on your second or third party data set. You have to put a bunch of data scientists behind that and store all of that data in a warehouse, and then have the skill set and knowledge to be able to create those models yourself. Or you use a specialist vendor, and I'm not even going to do a fake cough because it actually hurts at the moment to do a fake cough, like what we do. That's the last time I'll talk about sales from a ringside perspective. So if you're thinking, okay, well, what data do I actually need to do marketing attribution, and actually how do I do that for the brands that I'm working for or with from a partner perspective? What things are actually useful? The thing that people are surprised about the most is it's not just your web analytics. That is a core part, but you do need a number of other interactions to understand a consumer. So if we start at the bottom here, which is where we have location, time, and user identity for the data sets we're capturing, we want to know certain events that are going on. So a micro or a macro event. So a micro event is something that a customer is telling us they're engaging with us in some way. In an e-commerce environment, that could be an add to basket or a product page view or a category view or add to a wish list. They're all things where a customer is engaged with the brand. They've not bought, so it's not a macro conversion, but they've engaged with the brand enough that we want to go, okay, that's interesting. That's giving us context. Then we move up to the next area. So that's visits. So that is your web visit data, with a number of other data points behind that. So channel, device, etc. But it's just the information about a web visit. Very similar from an app perspective, but then you also want to pull in things like your call center calls or people who have attended a webinar like this, where you can link all of that together into a profile for that individual customer. You move up to the next area, which is impressions, and this is where we tend to lose a lot of either location data or user identifier data. So this is where we want to say how many people have been sent an email, how many people have been sent direct mail, the trackable display impressions, partner visits. There's a number of things we can do here where the key goal is be able to say this person, so this customer A got sent an email at this time. They may not have actually clicked on anything in that email, but we want to put that into the context of what that customer has done to give us a better understanding of that customer themselves. And then we go up into reach data. Now, this is where you most likely, and in most of the time, you don't actually get a customer identifier. So this is only ever used when you're doing any form of correlated analysis. So things like media mix modeling on econometrics, where you're looking at the movement of data versus impressions, visits, and events, where you have an identifier for that customer and you're likely to be able to put them into a single customer view. So how this looks when you're then joining things together in the real world, you have all of your MarTech platforms. So the Google Ads, the Bing, the excuse me, I apologize again, COVID strikes. You've got LinkedIn, etc. All of your MarTech platforms. You have a marketing identifier that allows you to link that to your web analytics. And within your web analytics, you have your macro events. So if someone purchases or creates a lead in a B2B environment, You then have your micro events, things like page views as well. And then you have your satellite data. So that's things like your CRM system, your order-based system. And that's where you can link a customer identifier from your web analytics to satellite data. Now, this is really valuable in a B2B space where typically there is a disconnect between what happens online and then the person who ultimately purchases via a sales person 3 or 4 months later. So one of the things that's really important is you can actually link those things together and you can work out what acquisition or behavioral campaigns are driving the actual sales, not just the leads that happen digitally. So all of that comes into a data warehouse. The important bit here is you add context to those journeys. So you link those data sets together. You're not just aligning those data sets. You're actually saying, hey, this particular visit had this keyword, it cost this much, and then that keyword turned into a visit, which turned into a customer, and this is the details of what that customer did with a CRM outlook. So we sent them 3 or 4 emails. You can do all of this in Europe under GDPR with data privacy taken into mind because you're using pseudo anonymized data sets. So you're not ever capturing any form of true PII. You're not getting their email addresses, etc. You're using pseudo anonymized identifiers, which are things like a customer ID that the brand is stored. So all of that can be done because the ultimate goal here, and if I simplify this from a web only view, is that you've linked to your MarTech data, so you now know that that PPC visit cost this much and it had women's trainers in the first visit. Then that person came back and we know it was organic search and we know what the landing page was, etc., etc. So we know what the cost of every single interaction was. The thing that is really important is that the micro conversions, the things that the customer is engaging within that visit, are so powerful when we want to understand the value of that visit and that interaction. So what I'm going to do now is a whistle-stop tour of calculating the value of from an attribution perspective, because this is incredibly important when you're looking at things like lifetime value, and then you're also looking at cost to acquire a new customer versus an existing customer. So from an attribution models perspective, there are a number of different models that you can create. First click is one that's typically used in display marketing, and this is where you give 100% of the credit. So say it was a €100 conversion, instead of the visit that drove the conversion, the one that was right at the end of the journey, we give €100 worth of credit, so the full credit of the conversion back to the start. Google Analytics 4 currently uses last non-direct. This is the second from last visit if the last visit was direct, or it's the last visit if that person was direct. Pretty much everyone nowadays is moving to a machine learn model, whether they call it data driven or they actually use proper machine learning. This is where you should be looking. If you're looking to invest in any form of attribution or even do anything advanced through to LTV, it has to be machine learned nowadays. There's no value in you understanding last click, first click, last non-direct click. I used to do presentations that lasted an hour just on this part of the topic, but I'm going to skip through that for now. But again, reach out if anyone's got any questions on specifics. So what's really important is for brands to really understand what micro events are available to them to give a better context to a customer journey. So this is where a lot of brands don't necessarily understand what is going on with the 99% of people who come to their website and don't convert. And they don't think of it like that. They think, well, I have a 1% conversion rate. Therefore, if I make that a 2% conversion rate, I'll double my revenue, which is completely true. But what you don't have is, if you just look at that 1%, you're kind of ignoring the 99% of people who are telling you things. So this is where micro events become really important. Is, well, what micro events appear in those journeys? What is a customer telling us that they're not ready to buy right now, but what are they telling us that they may be buying in the future? And this is where we can look at things like the propensity for someone to convert. So what is the likelihood of someone converting? Well, that is actually one of the outputs from an attribution model, is to say, here are the interactions that are incredibly important throughout that journey. then we can say, actually, these micro conversions, if that appears in the journey, that makes that person 3 times more likely to convert than the average user. So there's outputs like that. So the usefulness from a PPC perspective is really valuable. So to summarize a lot of things here, one of the outputs is the ability to say, here is the last click revenue. Here is the value that this engagement is got in a last click scenario. That is how the Google Ads is managed in most cases in some way. Typically in a Google Analytics 3 scenario, they actually have a last non-direct as the main value. But when you look at things like ROAS, so the return on ad spend, there's a number of campaigns that will look very good, and they typically are the campaigns that drive activity at the end of a buyer's journey. So brand activity tends to look very good. And in the example here, you've got 900% ROAS and 700% ROAS on the 2 brand campaigns that we can see here. But things like DSAs, so dynamic search ads or generic, tend to not perform as well because in a last click scenario, because they are very good at acquiring customers who will convert 2 or 3 visits later. So an attribution model will give credit to those interactions that happen further on in that journey and take from the interactions that just are converting users. And it will give value to those types of things that a customer does whilst they're researching that brand or that service that's being provided. So then what we're able to say is, well, this is the in this case, it's the ringside ROAS, but it's the attributed ROAS, where we can say, well, we've devalued some of the activity you had there, and 600% ROAS is easily enough to have an understanding on. But from a DSA perspective, in the example here, if you had an 88% ROAS, you'd probably look to cut that activity or at least devalue it and scale it down and remove budget. But what we're able to see here is, well, you've massively undervalued that activity. That activity you need to drive more people to, because what that is doing is that's the type of activity where people are coming in, they're engaging with you, they're interacting with you, they're showing you that they're interested in working with you or buying from you. And later on, so visits later, that person is then converting very often, and you're seeing a return on investment on this. So this is where you can then go, well, actually, if I invest in this area, then that will drive future conversions later down the line. And this is incredibly important to understand when we're starting to talk about cost to acquire a customer and understanding lifetime value, is that initial investment from a visit perspective, just to get the first person to buy, the activity that you get to acquire that person in the first place, when they're still in their research phase, they're still working out whether you're a legitimate brand that they want to buy from. They still trying to work out whether the product or service you're providing is fit for purpose, is fit for what they need. At that point, that activity is really interesting and really useful for that consumer, but they may not buy at that point. And being able to reattribute the value back to that is where the real value in attribution is. Now, a number of these things can actually be automated. So you can pass data back up into the SERPs themselves. So you can say, I want to bid more for these people. I want to put conversions back into Google Ads and say this person did actually convert, and I'm going to give 60% of the credit of this conversion to this interaction, not the one that Google Ads is giving all the credit to. So that is a really interesting way of viewing performance, and you can feed that automatically back into the Google Ads, which then feeds the SERPs, and it's this cyclical approach to things, and all of this is done via machine learning. There's a ton of other things that can be done from a PPC perspective, but we'll move on to SEO for now. So one of the things that's really valuable in SEO, and SEOs are notoriously bad at saying what their performance is like. Now, the reason why they're notoriously bad is because SEO is typically undervalued. And the latest statistic we have on this is that where SEO happens before PPC, so when PPC drives that conversion, SEO is undervalued by about 19%. So if you think about when those meetings happen on a weekly, monthly basis and performance is being reviewed, and PPC is taking a lion's share of the revenue, and therefore, when you're talking about budgets, whether that be actual media budgets, agency budgets, if you're undervaluing the activity that's actually driving that person to come back to the website. Would that person have come back if they didn't have that original SEO visit? And in the scenario that we've got here, that all of these interactions, these 3 visits that happened down the line, where they came direct, PPC, and affiliate, effectively none of them would have happened if that person didn't know about the brand's existence. And it then becomes a concept of how much are you overvaluing or undervaluing the activity you're doing. That then means that, do you need to be investing more in the likes of SEO? And you probably need to be investing at least 19% more than you are at the moment from an SEO perspective when it comes to the effort you're putting in to drive people to the website. Again, whistle stop through channels here, but wanted to make sure that we ticked a number of boxes. So when we're talking about affiliates, majority of the time we're talking about the type of customer journey where someone comes in via SEO, then they come via PPC. And the expected path as the brand is that person was ready to convert on that PPC visit. But we've all done it, that we go, I can probably get a discount on this. So they leave the website, they go to a search engine, they type in the name of the brand and discount code or voucher code. They then come back to the website. There is a new visit via an affiliate, and we get that conversion. Now, that isn't necessarily what the brand wants the customer to do. If they're in a position that they're ready to convert, why are we effectively paying commission for that person just to get a discount? So this is a challenge that pretty much any brand that does any form of discounting or any form of voucher codes via affiliates has is, well, would that person have converted anyway? Because the main reason you want to work with affiliates or partners is to drive incremental customers. It's not to just pay a commission and effectively the discount from that commission conversion when that person was ready to convert. So one of the really interesting ways to view this, and just to understand with the data that you have from an attribution model, is to look at the time difference between the visit before the conversion and the conversion happening itself. And if you look at that by the type of affiliate, you start to see which affiliates are really driving a customer to leave and come back. And for one of the brands we work with, it was showing that it was about 2 minutes on average between people leaving the website and then coming back via this one affiliate. And then you look at a content affiliate, for example, that actually has valuable traffic, as starting new journeys, and that was days. So the difference between those 2 different customer journeys are really interesting, and it's something that brands need to better understand when we're talking about affiliates. The last channel we're going to talk about is CRM. Realistically, we're speaking here about the data that you can get and how you can link things to better talk about things like cost to acquire customer and LTV. So what's really interesting here, and this happens pretty much across the board with every brand that I've worked with in the past, is the ability for you to say, what is a new customer, is a challenge for a lot of organizations. So one thing that we do with every brand we work with is we load every single historic conversion that we can get our hands on at a customer ID level. We even get that down to a SKU level within the order if that data is available. Now, what this is incredibly important when we're trying to really understand customers here. We're trying to understand customers without understanding their name, their address, any of their personal information. What we're trying to understand is, what is the context of that engagement we've seen? So when that person visits the website, to us, if we started with a new brand at the end of this week on April the 1st, and the person converted 2 weeks ago, we would want to see that that is a person who's already converted. We wouldn't want to see that as a new visitor to the website. We wouldn't want to see that as a new customer if they were to convert again in the future. So one of the things that's really valuable is being able to grab that historic data that typically comes from a CRM or order management system and pull that in and link that. So when we get new people to the website who are actually new, we can then understand how much we should be cost and spending from a media spend perspective, and how much effort we should be putting out to bring those people to the website and actually get them to engage with us in a meaningful way. So those customers who come back, we can say, well, actually, in this case here, we've seen 2 conversions through the web over the last 6 months, but actually that person had 6 historically. So we know what their revenue to date is, and we know that their total conversion count is 8 at this point. So this leads us into the major topic we want to talk about, which is understanding the customer. Now, this feeds into LTV, and hopefully the story flows nicely as we go from attribution through to understanding the customer. And one of the challenges is nomenclature. So, what do we call things, and what do we mean when we call things certain things? So, the first thing is when we talk about CPA, so cost per acquisition, it's also sometimes called cost per order, so CPO, or cost per sale, CPS. But when we're talking about CPA, and I'm just going to use that generally, it's worked out using the equation that we've got below. So the count of the sales in the period divided by the cost of the visits in the period gives you what the cost of a conversion is. And so you see that on the left-hand side, you've got the grey numbers or the black text over the grey box is the cost of the visit. And if someone converted in that visit, we have the conversion amount for that conversion. So hopefully nobody is in disagreement of the logic here or the maths, but the total cost of the interactions in this period is 19.3, and there are 4 conversions. Therefore, for these users, the cost per acquisition is $4.83. That's all well and good. But one of the challenges we have with cost per acquisition is the period of time that you're looking at is incredibly important. If you look at a very different period of time, you actually have a very different view of the world. So if you used exactly the same data set on the left, but instead you don't look far enough back, so you've just selected a different date range. Now we have 3 conversions, and we have a cost that totals 3 in that period. So now it's $1, which is quite different from the original number we had for what is the full data set. So it looks very different. And if we look at this in a very different way now, can we look at what the cost per acquisition was for that user? Well, what happens if a customer has converted twice in that date period? So the blended CPA is different than the cost per the first conversion versus the second conversion. And should the second conversion use all of the costs, or should it only use the costs between the first and the second conversion? So when someone is asking you to get what your CPA is, or you're trying to work this out, it's really important to understand the context of how you're doing that calculation, how you're getting a better understanding of what CPA is, and what the question you're actually asking is to get the response that means something. So cost to acquire a customer is different. So the cost to acquire a customer should be the total cost you have spent to acquire the first conversion for that person. That is not what most people use it as. A lot of businesses and some of the big e-commerce providers actually call CAC the same as CPA. So they use the same logic to do cost per acquisition that they do to cost to acquire a customer. What we should be doing is talking about the cost to acquire a new customer, but that terminology doesn't work. So CAC is what most people use. But what we should be saying is what is actually driving and how much are we spending to acquire that person for the first time? So that person's first conversion, how much are we spending to acquire that? Because if in a world where your activities are different for a new customer versus a returning customer, you want to know how much you're spending to acquire those new customers separate to how much you're spending to acquire the existing customers, because it should be less. And we'll go into that in a few slides' time. So thinking slightly differently, here are some other data sets that if you've got the underlying data here, you should have access to this. One is customer cost to date. So how much have you spent for that one individual so far? And then you can average that and median ways of averaging that. But how much have you spent on the average customer so far? Then you've got how much have you spent? How much revenue have you taken from the average customer? Now, the really difficult number to get to then is what is the future customer value. So then you calculate what the forecasted revenue is for that customer and the forecasted costs. Now, as I said, the cost should decrease. So the first time you acquire someone, that will be 8 times more expensive than the second conversion, which will then decrease again going down. So if you spent $10 to acquire that person the first time, it should be 20 cents to acquire them the next time. And that logic should play out moving forward. So now we get on to probably the most complicated thing mathematically that you can do in digital marketing when it comes to understanding customers. And this is lifetime value. My goal here is to do this in the next sort of 4 to 5 minutes, talk about this, and then open up to any questions that anyone has on this as well. So, what lifetime value is and what lifetime should be is giving you an idea of how much that customer is worth to you as a company for the entirety that they will engage with you forevermore, their lifetime. That is what that should be telling you. This is what the industry says. So, lifetime value is the average order value times by conversion frequency times by lifespan. We spent quite a lot of time researching this because I've been doing it slightly differently for the last decade, and I wanted to work out why people were doing it this way. One of the things and one of the challenges is, what do people mean when they say those three metrics: average order value, conversion frequency, and lifespan? So if I start with average order value, what time period are you going to calculate average order value for? That's a big question. Okay, well, let's look at the last 2 years. What percentage of the last 2 years is new customers versus existing customers from an average order value perspective? Is that going to influence your lifetime value? Well, yes, it will. If you've suddenly got an influx of people who are previous customers buying and they spend more with you, then that will influence a number of things in the lifetime value calculation. Conversion frequency is exactly the same. So, conversion frequency is how many times someone will buy from you in an average year. Well, how many times someone will buy from us in their first year versus their fifth year will be dramatically different. So, actually understanding that is really important as well. But typically, those two metrics had a number that we use. So, here is $100 is our average order value of all conversions in the last 2 years, and people on average will convert 1.2 times a year. And people were happy with that logic. And the last one is really interesting. And Avinash Kushak, who is an absolute legend in digital analytics, even has on his own website, which is a fantastic resource for marketing analytics and data insight, even said lifespan, he uses 2.5 years. So the calculation that is used here will be what your average order value is times by the amount of times that people will buy in a year. So let's say it's 1.2 for your brand if you averaged all of your data, and then times 2.5 years. I wasn't happy with that. And when we were working through this as a company, I said, look, I think there's a smarter way of doing this, which is what we're going to talk to you about now. You can obviously make your own decisions, but I think that you can still use the same logic we're using and just do stuff in Excel to give a better view, in our opinion, of what lifetime value is for you. So the first thing is, how do you calculate AOV? What we did is we used all of the historic data that our customer gave us, and this was conversions that they've seen for the last 15 years. And then we worked out, firstly, that we were going to use what's called jackknife sampling, which is basically we remove outliers. So it removes the upper and lower quartile of AOV and then does a mean average of the middle half between the upper and lower quartiles. This gave us a much clearer view of what AOV was. It also removed some of the issues with using mean and median. But the biggest difference wasn't just the type of average we used, was that we did this based on the year that they'd first purchased historically. So The AOV, as you can see by the graph on the right-hand side here, the AOV of a customer who bought 5 years ago for the first time is significantly higher than the AOV of someone who's just purchased. And that increases through till when we end up with lower data points in 11, 12, 13, 14 years. And this is when that person has purchased again in those years. So that was really interesting. What happened when we looked at conversion frequency? Who knew? The first year, on average, people were buying 1.25 times in their first year. But that jumped up massively from the second year, third year, fourth year, and up until when we get 13 years out, the average customer is nearly buying 2 times a year. Well, that changes that logic massively. And do we actually, instead of using annual repeating, do we actually start to use monthly and start to go, well, how long is it? And actually do some smarter maths when it comes to LTV to talk about monthly, which is what we're actually doing from a subscription model perspective at the moment. And the maths is really complicated, and this is why I hire people smarter than me. Now, the last one is really interesting. I really was not happy with picking a number of the lifespan of a customer. It really was not sitting well with the logic of how we wanted to build this. So this is how we flipped the concept of retention on its head. And this is where it's very different from a subscription model perspective versus a typical e-commerce single engagement. But what we were able to say is the people who first purchased last year, what's their return rate to buy again in the second year? This is a log graph, which you can see from the axis on the left-hand side. But of the people who purchased this year, 100% of them have purchased this year. So it will always be 100%. But year 1, 2, 3, 4 years ago, those people will have a retention rate. So then once we've put all of that together, we will then be able to say it's not just that they'll come back for 2.5 years. A percentage of people will come back continuously over that time. And from the AOV and conversion frequency we've done, we know how much they're going to spend when they come back in their third year on average. And we also know how many times they'll buy it in that third or fourth year by average. And when you pull all of that together, the difference between their first year revenue, so their first year revenue in this example here is $378. So they made in their first year over 1.24 conversions, $378. But the lifetime revenue for that customer over the period of time that we think that they will stay with you, which will constantly change as we see people returning more or less frequently, is then $962, which is significantly higher. It's nearly 3 times higher. So this massively changes the concept of how much you're spending to acquire that customer for the first conversion, and then how much you're spending to reacquire that customer. And so when we pull this all together, you also need to understand how much you are spending to bring that customer back through multiple conversions in their lifetime. So the first conversion is the CAC, so the cost to acquire that customer. A lot of brands, especially in, say, insurance, spend about as much as they actually make the first year. But the second year, with the retention rate that they take into consideration, they spend hardly anything. It's all email traffic or getting that person through retargeting. So that should make them more money second year, third year forward. In e-commerce, you need to be making money on the first conversion, but you'll make significantly more if you manage the campaigns to bring that person back through a cheaper medium. Email is the primary one, but you can also use retargeting lists using that customer's email address, etc., through paid social or paid search, and be able to understand how much you're spending to reacquire that customer for their second conversion, third, fourth, etc. Cool. I think I've left about 5 minutes for some questions. If anyone has any further questions after this, my contact details are on here. Feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Yes, we do have a question from Mila. She says a website, or he says, I'm sorry, I don't know. Website pages conversion is the most difficult for me to master. What would you recommend?
So I think when you want to understand what and like anyone who's doing conversion optimization in that space of understanding what a website is converting and which pages are really important, one of the first things to do is to make sure that you're understanding what that conversion journey looks like. It's not so a lot of people go, well, I can't really optimize my homepage because my homepage doesn't have a direct correlation to someone actually purchasing on the website. Well, one of the first things to do is map what that journey looks like. So if someone comes from the homepage, do they go to a category page, then a product page, then the add to basket? So what you then need to do is look at what is the conversion action from that page itself, as well as the ultimate conversion on the website. So from the homepage, where do you want to put that person next? If it's to a category page, then actually, are you looking at the percentage of people who are going from the homepage to the category page? And how, when you make those changes to the homepage, monitor that as well as the people who will be going past that and ultimately converting later down the line. So that's really important. And the other thing is, whenever you're doing any CRO testing, there will be a winner in most cases. There'll be a winner and there'll be a loser. But unless it's a 99% of people are converting on one and 1% are converting on the other, the loser still worked for some people. So you have to make sure that you take learnings from why the thing won and why the other variant lost. Because that's the thing that a lot of people just go, well, that version that we built is way better. Let's just move it across. It's the why that's really important there, and the data will let you answer that. And this is where micro conversions are incredibly important.
Mm. Thanks a lot. Okay, another question from Tamara. Is there any tool software that you would recommend for monitoring customer journey?
So obviously, my company Ringside is one of them. I think a lot of this depends on what you want to look at and what the output is. So the brand themselves, if you have a product, and what I mean that is that there is a platform that someone engages with your website. So, for example, an insurance company, those businesses, this isn't just web pages or visits. This is actually a platform that people engage with. They have to fill in a multitude of different forms in that journey. That's typically called platform analytics rather than customer journey, which they're both customer journeys, but one is definitely more platform analytics. And the likes of Amplitude, and there's a bunch of other brands in that space that are focused more on the platform analytics side than the marketing customer journey side. But a lot of the time, the tools software are only going to take you so far. A big sort of value add here is people, and it's not necessarily a tool or software that will tell you the answer to it. You actually need to have the team in place, either internally or with a partner, that allows you to actually get value from the data set itself. The platform will just give you information. Turning that into insight that drives a change in your organization is always going to be people. And I probably shouldn't say that as a company that runs a platform, but that's where we see most of the value here. And it's very much an 80-20 split.
Yeah.
You need to invest in the people, which is the 80%, because otherwise the platform really doesn't give you that return on investment.
Okay. I'm just conscious of the time. So we still have like less than 2 minutes and two questions, but I can answer one about the presentation will be provided for the people who had the paid tickets. So you will have the recordings as well. Then I'm not sure if you can answer this like in a 1 minute and a half. In which situation a company should invest in affiliate marketing instead of SEO and PPC? Can you give us a case about it? So maybe just give a quick example.
Yeah. So the only sort of the only companies that should do affiliates instead of SEO and PPC is where either legally or you can't, under your own consciousness, invest in SEO or PPC. So if you think of the porn industry, medical, there's a number of spaces in there where you can't put the dollars yourself, euros, behind the activity, whether that be for legal reasons or whatever. That's the only reason why you would do affiliate first. SEO first, then paid search, then email realistically, then affiliates. But affiliates are really good at going out to a marketplace where you don't have the skill set or the legal logic behind you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Russell. Those were all of the questions, and thank you double because you have COVID, but you were just great.
Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone for listening.
Yeah, and I hope it was of a value. Just make sure everyone to check the other tracks and the rest of the conference website. There are a lot of great things to
There's
explore.
some great speakers.
Yeah. Bye bye, everyone.
Bye.
All right, and it's the countdown to end the session. Great. Then we're